Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for giving up an hour out of your afternoon to come along and listen as we have this webinar launching the very first Best Australia Behaves Survey, or BABS as we affectionately like to refer to it. My name is Kate Leithran and I'm one of the Deputy Co-Directors here at the Best Centre. We're presenting to you today from Brisbane, Queensland at the Queensland University of Technology. So thank you very much for being a part of the day today. If you have any questions as we go throughout, please pop them into the Q&A or otherwise reach out to one of us as hosts. And well, let's begin. I would like to commence with an acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the lands on which this session is coming to you from today. QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits, and recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning. We acknowledge the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. Okay, so today we are launching, very excited to be launching the Best Australia Behaves Survey. This is our 2022 data being launched in 2023 and the first time that we have run this initiative. We are also going to be running another of these surveys and launching the results next year. So I will be providing a little bit of a preview on what we can look forward to with that survey at the end of our session today. But primarily today is all about introducing the report and talking to you about what you might find in the report, which will hopefully be of interest to you in your role, be you in industry, academia, policy, or just generally interested. So thank you for coming along and being a part of the day today. This is the front cover of the report. So when you are able to download a copy, this is what you're looking for. So what actually is the Best Australia Behaves Survey? So this survey was an online survey that was developed within the Best Centre by the program leads and the deputy leads from the Best Centre. And I would like to pause here for a moment and just acknowledge the huge amount of work from so many people that has gone into making this report a reality. So as you can see, we've had the program leads and deputy leads from the Best Centre actively involved. There are so many people, I will try and name everyone. We've had Amanda, we've had Uber, we've had Steve, we've had Rebecca, we've had Benno, Ben, we have had Arthur, Keenan, Ozan, we've had Louisa and Ross and Dietmar and Laura coming in as our program leads, deputy leads, and otherwise involved there, or as our directors. And we have overseeing us at the moment our new interim director, Professor Byron Keating. We are grateful for the seed funding that we received to commence this project, to our advisory board for their advice and suggestions along the way, to Nat Sketcher, Best Centre visual designer, for the amazing graphics, Ryan McAndrew for the analysis that went into making this report a reality, and of course, Katie Baker, Zoe Engelman, and Jennifer Petley for their support along the way as well. And I apologise, I'm sure I've missed very many people, but thank you. We are grateful. Together, you've made this report a reality. And thank you as well to those of you who are joining us in the audience and engaging with this part of the journey. We are very grateful to have you here too. So we did this online survey and we included a range of different questions: demographics, psychographics. Importantly, because we come from the Centre for Behavioural Economics, Society and Technology, we included a host of behavioural bias questions. And we also sought people's opinions on key topical issues on things like the environment, trust, and technology. So this was designed to uncover trends over time, but also act as a barometer on some current issues of interest. So as I said, this was collected in 2022 and we aimed for a fairly nationally representative sample at the time. We had 1,120 people respond. We had people coming to us from across different jurisdictions, from a variety of different demographic profiles. And we have in the report a full breakdown of the sample characteristics. So in terms of how we chose the 2022 topics, I cannot take credit for this. I mentioned at the start how integral the program leads and deputy leads have been to designing the survey, and it is from them that we actually had these questions. So we had questions on the topic of climate change, on artificial intelligence, trust, medical technology, the responsibility of commercial and government organisations, sexual behaviour, and data quality issues. So these topical issues were selected by those programs. Each of those people, our leads, deputy leads, are an expert in their respective fields. So these were the issues that our programs judged to be the most relevant and important to understanding the behaviour of Australians in the given year. So in this case, our 2022 topics. Which means that we need to jump into a little bit of a time machine and go back and think about what was happening in 2022. So this data was collected towards the end of 2022. And this is what we have been experiencing in Australia that year, just a small snapshot of it. So we had the Russia-Ukraine war beginning at the beginning of 2022. We had SpaceX launching their first all-civilian crewed mission to space. We had the G20 summit taking place in Bali. We had, unfortunately, a lot of significant cybersecurity and privacy incidents starting to affect or continuing to affect Australians. The federal election was held in Australia. Unemployment at the time was historically low as the country was starting to rapidly recover from the pandemic. We saw a lot of natural disasters occurring globally, including significant floods in Queensland and New South Wales, to look locally. The Australian government announced new initiatives and policies to combat climate change. We saw a lot of issues with supply and inflation starting to emerge or continuing to emerge. And we saw the Australian rental crisis really starting to begin. So this acts as a little bit of a background to just put the results in context for what was happening and what was on the minds of Australians in 2022. Also important background for us to have is that, as I said, we are a centre for behavioural economics, society and technology, and so we included behavioural biases in our study. So as humans, we tend to encounter a lot of information, a lot of things we have to process each and every day. My behavioural economist colleagues who are on the call could probably tell you quite how many, and the number is overwhelming. So it's often in our best interest to try and think about and respond to things fairly quickly, which is where sometimes humans engage with behavioural biases. You may have also heard these called cognitive biases or heuristics or rule of thumb. So these are ways to help us think a little bit faster and try and cut through the information. The issue arises where sometimes, while the bias may help us to think quickly, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're thinking as rationally or making the best decision that we could. So we looked at a range of common biases in the survey, including overconfidence bias, framing, availability, conjunction fallacy, illusion of control, gender, and of course the overall system 1 versus system 2 thinking, or thinking fast and slow, for those of you who have read the book from Professor Kahneman. So without further ado, now that we've spoken about what the survey is and why we ran it, how we came up with the topics and all of the background, let's delve into the top findings. So these are just headline findings, and when you have a look at the report, you'll find that we have a section on each of these that really goes into much more depth. So number 1, and this is drawing from the behavioural economics findings and from those behavioural biases. As a whole, we tended to find that most people were thinking quickly. So they were really engaging in that fairly quick, fairly intuitive thinking, which doesn't always lead to the best outcomes. So we delve into the impact of behavioural biases on our thoughts and our behaviours. We also looked at financial literacy and found that it does offer a small resilience buffer against the cost of living crisis. We looked at cost of living pressures, how affordable people felt it was to live towards the end of 2022, and found a correlation with our sex lives coming through there. We saw that, on the whole, Australians do still have hope for the environment in the context of climate change, but it often depends on how the messaging is being framed. We looked at our pro-social expectations and found that while we have generally always had high pro-social expectations for government, we are now starting to have those same expectations for industry, which is an interesting development. In terms of trust, there was a trend towards people trusting industries more when they could see those industries offering visible and authentic care. So often people had higher levels of trust for those industries or those businesses that they were interacting with quite frequently and they felt quite close to, for instance, the local GP or local cafe, things like that. We also spoke to people, asked them questions about who they tended to want to hear from in times of trouble, for instance, during the pandemic when the messaging was coming out, and found that at those times we do want to hear from those people that we trust. And we have some details on who those people might be. And finally, as you know, we asked some questions about artificial intelligence around technology and how people feel about those things. And we found that for those people who have a high level of trust in humans, that level of trust also tends to come across to developments in artificial intelligence and technology, which may make these people important voices during the transformation. So, a few selected findings and a caveat here. The report is, let me see how many pages, I have it sitting on my desk with me, over 40 pages. So these are just some broad overview findings to get us started. And we encourage everyone, when we release the website at the end of this webinar, to please go and download your own copy of the report and delve into the details. So, financial health. So we asked people about affordability and whether they saw cost of living as less affordable than the previous year, and tended to find that yes, the average was coming in below that midpoint at 38.17 out of 100, meaning that yes, on the whole, people were seeing the cost of living as less affordable. So this was, to remind everyone in context, at the end of 2022, we'll be asking the same question this year as well. We did find that people with higher financial literacy were slightly more positive around affordability, and we saw a range of different scores coming through. So 28% of people had a perfect score, scoring 5 out of 5 for those financial literacy questions. We saw 25% getting 4 out of 5, and so on, as you can see on the little chart there. And these were using questions that were sourced from, I believe, the Hilda survey, so that we could align with those, and asked around things like how to calculate with interest rates, how to calculate with inflation, how to understand diversity and risk, and these types of things. We also asked people, if you did have to cut expenses, what types of things would you spend less on, and which things would you definitely not be willing to cut your expenses on? So we saw some expected results. For instance, one of the things that people were most likely to cut their spending on was alcohol and tobacco. We saw things like clothes and shoes, food and beverages, and people were generally less willing to cut spending on things that I would say were more future focused, often things like insurance, financial services, health, housing, these types of things that tend to be quite important, quite aligned with our values as consumers. Interestingly, you'll notice that education appears in both, something that people are willing to spend less on and also not willing to spend less on. And we thought a bit about these results, and there's probably two explanations. One is that people have a real divergence in opinion on what is going to be easier or best for them to cut spending on. There's definitely no cookie cutter approach or easy cuts that can be made. And the other consideration is how we interpret these categories. So we gave fairly broad categories, but I would hazard a guess that we would see education for our children as being quite different to further education for ourselves, for example. So we definitely saw some trends in things people were willing to spend more or less on, but overall I would say there's definitely no one-size-fits-all approach there. We also asked some questions about sex lives and how much sex people felt they were having now as compared to a couple of years ago, which was during 2020 or during the pandemic. And the average score out of 100 was 44.96, so close to the midpoint, but slightly below, meaning that people felt they were having less sex now than they were 2 years in the past. Importantly, the standard deviation for this question was 30.26, meaning that the answers to this question varied widely. And when we looked at the analysis, we saw that the results indicated that this could come down to sexuality, education, income, religiosity, and age, as well as certain behavioural biases like availability bias and illusion of control bias. And one of our interesting findings was that the more affordable people felt cost of living was, the higher their reported sex levels for the current period. So definitely something interesting happening there, and potentially our cost of living and the stress that arises from that is affecting more than just our bank balances. We were also really interested in how people felt around climate change. So 2 of the questions that we asked were around whether people believed new technology would help to mitigate some of the negative aspects of climate change, and also whether they themselves were prepared to make lifestyle changes to help slow climate change. And we can see the results coming in. Here we have 58.42, so just above that midpoint for the first response. So there is some hope that technology will help to mitigate some of those negative aspects of climate change. But importantly, people are also willing to make some changes in their own lifestyle, and that's coming in a little bit higher at 62.59. One of the other interesting things that you'll see as you go through the report, and I haven't included a lot in the presentation here because there's quite a bit of depth, but we've looked at how the different opinions, different questions relate to one another. So if you believe one thing about climate change, how is that likely to affect what you think about the responsibility of government and industry and that type of thing? Speaking of the responsibility of industry and government, we also asked people about their expectations for commercial organisations versus government for providing service inclusion. So this is based on the work of Professor Fisk and colleagues. So when we say inclusion, we mean offering accessibility, offering choice, enhancing happiness, and relieving suffering. And we saw that people had slightly higher pro-social expectations for government service organisations than for commercial, but the difference between those 2 scores was not large, and not as large as we might have expected, meaning that as consumers, we are starting to hold government and commercial organisations to similar standards when it comes to offering accessibility, choice, happiness, and relief of suffering. This was another case where both demographics and behavioural biases had an impact, so definitely worth delving into if that's something of interest to you. Trust was a really important topic in the 2022 survey. Here I've included a snapshot of an infographic that's included in the report where we looked at different industries and the level of trust. So our most trusted being health, coming in with a mean or average score of 68 out of 100, and media being the least trusted, coming in at 46.95. Again, we asked fairly broad categories this time around, and as I've seen in other studies that we've been conducting this year, sometimes we see 2 different groups within one classification or multiple different groups. So for instance, there are a whole range of different people, different groups working in the health industry that may have differing levels of trust, and likewise in the media, if we were to compare, for instance, social media, traditional media, digital media, and so on. But definitely delve in and have a look at those. Some questions around information and data issues. So at the start of the webinar, we were speaking about the introduction of behavioural biases as part of the questions in this survey, and how as humans we tend to have these behavioural biases to help us process all of this information that's coming towards us on a day-to-day basis and to make quick decisions. So we found when we asked people that in general, they were experiencing just too much data or too much information, and it was not always telling them the same story. So they didn't always have a lot of trust in the accuracy of what was coming towards them. And the survey has shown us that Australians are kind of overwhelmed with that influx of data from multiple sectors. And when it came to where people were actually encountering data quality issues, the 2 most frequently cited domains were politics and social media coming through. Again, behavioural biases had a role to play here. For instance, for people who have high levels of availability bias, this makes people more likely to report encountering almost all data quality problems. And bringing up towards the end of our broad overview of the topics, artificial intelligence and medical technology. So there was a really interesting question put forward by one of the programs around how much trust people would have in various different agents or people to design a town or to help with town planning. So would you trust a general AI, which is quite good at a range of different tasks? Would you trust a specific AI that has been programmed to just focus on town planning? Would you prefer a human town planner? And what was the level of trust in artificial intelligence anyway? So we can see on this graph, which I have pulled from the report, we have AI trust as this light blue line coming down here. And we can see that is quite related to the trust in those different types of AI, general and town specific. This dark blue line up the top here is our human town planner. And we can see here that across all age groups, the human planner is always more trusted than either of the different two types of AI, which is quite interesting. But we do have this peak, like at this point, when people are between 35 and 44 years old, we see that we get close to our level of trust in a human planner for general AI and town-specific AI. There are a range of reasons for why this might be, and they would need further research. Part of it may be that people in this age group are starting to be exposed, particularly in the last couple of years, to a lot more artificial intelligence as part of their work and making them more familiar. But I won't speculate too much on that, but it was an interesting finding. So we also asked around people's comfort with different types of medical or digital technology innovations. For instance, how comfortable people were with online GP consultations online or having 3D printed replacement body parts. And people tended to score around the midpoint, but they had really different opinions there as well. So I can see a hand up, so I'm just going to, if I can find and open that. There we are. Hi, Charlotte. Did you have a question?
Hello, you can hear me. I'm just wondering if anybody else is experiencing the issue where the slide's still showing up what is titled "What is the best Australian behaviour survey slide" rather than what seems to be being spoken about.
That is a very good point. It's definitely not what I want happening. Thank you for letting me know. What is everyone else seeing? Can you put it in the Q&A if you are having the same issue as Charlotte? Oh, hang on, I have someone. All good, okay. Sorry, I have a few people watching in the office as well. So most people are okay, it looks okay. So I apologize, Charlotte, that is happening for you. You could try popping out of the webinar and back in again and seeing if it doesn't update. Otherwise, I'll definitely be sharing the recording afterwards, so you'll have access to all of these and the much more detailed and interesting report itself. But thank you for letting me know. That's a bother, especially when you have graphs that you want to be looking at. Okay, thank you, everyone, for your comments in the Q&A. Okay, so we spoke about the 3D printed replacement body parts, which I think is quite interesting and something that will probably start to come to the fore a bit in future years. And I believe this brings us to, yes. So I mentioned that for each of those top 8 findings that we were looking at the beginning, we have a section where we kind of delve into what those might mean and some suggestions. So whether you're coming to us as a policymaker from an industry perspective, as a research perspective, or you are just part of the general population and you are interested, we have broken down what each of these kind of trends that have emerged from the data might mean and what they might offer you in terms of value and going forward. So that's in our looking ahead section of the report. So I've just screenshotted one of them there, but you'll see I have the report sitting here in front of me in the real world. So we have a whole range of different areas here. So whatever you are interested in, hopefully there will be something for you, some piece of information or nugget that you can take forward and think, yeah, that's something that I can use, or that's interesting to me. So that brings us to the end of my whirlwind tour of the report for 2022, which we are releasing right now, today. And next year, we have the BABS survey coming up again, and we have our questions or planned data collection is going on right now, I believe. So we'll again be including our behavioural biases and demographics, which is important to us as a centre and adds a lot of valuable information to interpreting the results. We will be asking about cost of living responses. We'll be looking at AI, biometrics, and quality data. We'll be looking at climate change actions, expectations for business and what they should be engaging with or not, medical testing and safety, disaster preparedness, and trust in industries and each other. So a lot of really interesting results coming out. This particular report is scheduled to be launched earlier next year than we won't be releasing it in November again. It will be brought forward and will be much earlier. So hopefully you can also join us when we launch that report as well, if any of this is of interest to you. So if you are interested in the report that we have just been talking about, please jump on and download a copy. We have a QR code there, and it leads to this address here. It's really long, which is why we've given you the QR code. Otherwise, feel free to email me and I will send you that link as well. So I'll leave this on the screen for a moment. And then I have another QR code to offer you where if you want to stay in the loop and make sure that you get all the updates on the next report as well, you can sign up for our newsletter. So I'll leave this there momentarily if everyone wants to grab that if they haven't. Okay, and switching to the next slide. So for our next report, if you would like to stay in the loop or you'd just like to stay in the loop with the Best Centre in general and what we do, please sign up for our Best Friends newsletter. So you can do that using this QR code. It will take you to the page to sign up. And that means you'll get all of our news and updates, including on our next report. So you'll be one of the first to know when it's about to launch and get your invite to that webinar. So I'll leave that up for a moment as well for anyone who's interested. Now I'm throwing multiple QR codes at you in the same couple of minute period. Okay. And that brings us to the end of the formal presentation part of the session. Thank you all so much for being a part of this, for your interest in the centre, for your interest in the report, and thank you so much to everyone who's been involved in making this a reality. If you have any questions or comments, please stick around and ask, and we would be delighted to share with you. Some people might be popping things in the Q&A. So if you have anything that you'd like to pop in the Q&A, you can. Otherwise, raise your hand and we will chat to you. Otherwise, for those who do have to leave, I know a lot of people have to head off to other meetings. I'm grateful for your time. Thank you so much for being a part of today.